Hey everyone, welcome to the 321st episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have a googly show for you. We are going to be talking first up about Google's plans for Matter and some little updates about Google's wearables and associated businesses from Google I/O. Plus, we are going to be talking about device data sharing because Consumer Reports did an excellent report. And we also have a bunch of security camera flaws to discuss. So all of that's going to go into the, oh man, people build these devices and they don't think about privacy and data protection. Grr. Also on that line, but in a more enterprisey way, we're going to be talking about an interview with the head of Swiss Re's reinsurance business about cyber attacks and the implications there. And then you're going to hear from our guest, who is Mark Hanson, the VP of Innovation at Sony Semiconductor America. And he's going to be talking about embedded computer vision. He's also asking for everyone who listens to send him cool ideas of what you can do with embedded computer vision. So, it'll be fun. And we're going to hear from our sponsor, Very, talking about their remote hardware development strategy, which I think is actually pretty interesting. All of this and more await you. But first, let's hear from Very. As y'all know, Very has been a sponsor for a long time. We love this IoT development firm here because they have a ginormous team of engineers, designers, and data scientists that are going to work with you to get your entire IoT hardware and software project totally operational. You can learn more at www.verypossible.com. That's www.verypossible.com. Thanks, Very. Okay, Kevin, let's talk about Google. Tuesday, today is Wednesday in our lives. This time travel via podcast is very tough for me.
Yes, and as usual, the big events take place over several days when we're trying to record the podcast, so we don't even know all the news yet out of Google I/O.
But we do know what matters.
Oh, you went there.
I did. I thought about it, but so many people complained that I did not make any Matter puns, so I felt like I owed it to y'all. All right, from the smart home portion of Google I/O, here's what they talked about. Google is going to support Matter across its Android and Nest devices. And the Nest products are going to be interoperable with all of their Nest speakers and displays, and all the speakers and displays will be Matter compliant hub. If there's a device that has Thread built in, like the Nest Wi-Fi, the Nest Hub Max, and the second generation Nest Hub, those are going to become connection points for Matter devices. They'll be what are they called? Session border router?
So the main ones are border routers, and those are the ones.
That's it.
Yeah, I presume those will all be border routers because they'll be plugged in at all times and on at all times.
Yes, and they have Wi-Fi.
Well, that too, yes.
So they'll be both a bridge and a border router. Okay, and they're going to unveil a smart home directory, which is basically a fancy way of saying, hey, all of these things are going to work with Matter.
Well, no, that's good though, because there's so many reference points to look for and look at to see what's compatible with what. My hope is that Google doesn't have to do that for long because Matter works with Matter. So you won't have to look at, say, a Google device list and an Apple device list and an Amazon device list in a perfect world.
Right. And that is the goal. I mean, I remember way back when Google announced Works With for Nest, right? And that was, there was a lovely website where you could go and see all the cool things that worked with Nest. And then they broke that and it no longer worked. So hopefully Matter will not follow along that. They also announced support for WebRTC for video and audio streaming for security cameras, video doorbells, and Google-enabled TVs and displays. And I don't know what to think about this. I've been excited about WebRTC for a while.
Have they said they're just using it for communications or video cameras as well?
They say video, they say the security cameras, and they mention actually Arlo, Logitech, Netatmo, and Wyze.
Okay, and I'm glad they said Wise because I've recently been trying to look at my Wise outdoor camera on a
Google
smart
Display.
Yeah, and it just churns and churns and never shows me anything. It's like it's thinking. Like it can't. There's too much latency so it won't even show me anything. So
Yay. Now, this is interesting because we can't use Matter for video cameras because Matter doesn't have a device profile or a data model for video cameras. And when I talked to Kevin Poe about that last week, he alluded to the fact that video cameras are pretty complicated. It's not like there are 7 things that a video camera can do, right? There's a lot of things, and depending on what it sees, it's going to change its reaction if it's truly smart, right? Also, and thank goodness this has happened because, man, Google, you were kind of far and away on this. They're basically using all of these devices to improve the home and away routines. So It will enable automatic control of your Nest cameras, devices, thermostats, smart lights, smart plugs, and smart switches based on if you're home or away. And basically, if you leave your house or everyone leaves your house, the away routine will automatically turn on. You no longer have to tell it.
So I love this because, not that we're going to talk about this in detail, but I bought a very mid-level at best robot vacuum a week ago. It has Wi-Fi in it, and that's about it in terms of advanced features. And while I can control it from the mobile app, I want it to, when I leave the house, do its thing. And this will help me tremendously. I know it supports Google Home technology. So when I leave the house, I want that thing to just go do its vacuuming.
I like it. Yes. If I ever left the house or anyone in my house ever left
there's
the
that
house.
Too. In a non-pandemic world.
Yeah. Or a I don't know. You've worked from home for as long as I have. So we're basically, yeah.
Yeah.
You're walking to the Wawa. I'm walking to my Starbucks.
We've been in this world for 14 or 15 years now.
Anyway, okay. And do you want to tell people, just in case they want to know what robot vacuum you bought?
Oh, sure. I bought an iRobot Roomba i4, which is actually not sold from iRobot. It is the Costco branded version of the Roomba i3.
Got it. I have a Roomba i7, and I love that thing.
Well, it has to be at least twice as good then. The number's higher.
Yes. The number's so much higher. I think we decided mine makes a map of my house, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I do get a not a map, but it shows where in the house it vacuum. I guess it's a map, but I can't do anything with it. I can't set that as do that one again tomorrow.
Oh, see, I have it. So this is the best thing. I tell Google, I'm like, hey, gee, tell Terrence to vacuum the office. And it just goes. I
can't do that. And mine is not named Terrence anyway, so.
Yes, my daughter is in charge of naming all of our devices.
Yeah, ours is Sweepy.
Sweepy is a good name.
Mm-hmm.
Sweepy McSweepface. Okay. The only other thing I have on the Google Matter confluence, I asked Google because Google helped invent, or rather the engineers at Nest helped invent the Thread protocol all the way back in 2014. And they put it in the original, like the 2nd generation and the 3rd generation Nest thermostats. Now, I know that Matter will be supported on the most recent Nest generation thermostats. I don't know if it's going to be supported on the older stuff, even though those older thermostats do actually have the Thread radio in there. So we're waiting for a word back on that, maybe next week.
Right. And before we leave the Google Matter news, I know you had spoken to the folks at Home Assistant.
Yes. And I did put this in the newsletter, but I know not everybody reads the newsletter, which is fine. It's a lot. And I talked to the founder of Home Assistant, and he said that they are eagerly awaiting all of the spec. And they're considering joining to get the spec because they don't want to wait till September. But they are keen on supporting Matter. They pointed out that there's going to be a Zigbee to Matter radio from Silicon Labs, and they're basically excited and eager and on board to start supporting Matter when they have the spec. And they may join the CSA, the Connectivity Standards Alliance that governs Matter, early just to get ahead of this. So that's the news from them. So if you have Home Assistant and you're like, how will Matter affect me? My bet is you might get, some updates and new drivers, but they're planning to they're planning to make it work.
And I guess you might have to buy a dongle or something.
Oh, the dongles. Yes.
The dreaded dongle.
You will never get rid of dongles. All right. And let's see. Other news from Google. Let's talk about it.
Wearables.
I'm very disappointed about this, Kevin.
Because you're a long-time Fitbit lover with good reason.
10 years of Fitbit. Google purchased it last year. And Google said they were going to bring Wear OS to Fitbit or Fitbit to Wear OS. We weren't sure. Now it looks like they're bringing Wear OS plus Tizen to Fitbit devices.
Yes, they're not calling it this, but I'm calling it Wear-Zen-Bit is the new OS for wearables.
Wear-Zen-Bit.
Wear-Zen-Bit. No, it's still going to be called Wear or Wear OS. But Google specifically said they're combining with Samsung's, obviously, support, two operating systems, Wear OS and Tizen, into a unified platform. So they're promising faster performance, apps loading 30% faster, being able to run the optical heart rate sensors 24/7 without taking up all your battery life. And Tizen does have a good, probably maybe a larger developer community for its wearable platform. Tizen actually is a really nice operating system for the Galaxy Watches. So this is actually good, I think.
Yeah, Samsung built Tizen.
We'll see how it comes together. That's the thing.
Well, yeah. I was going to say Samsung built Tizen with the IoT in mind. Remember that crazy keynote we went to?
I'll never forget it. Sitting next to you and that. Oh,
I think it was 2014, and the CEO of Samsung at the time just went off about the internet. I mean, honestly, I was all for it. You know, I didn't think we were going to get there anytime soon, but yeah.
It was good, but it was over the top. And talking about things that still haven't happened and may not happen for another 5 years. But yes, it was good. And yes, Tizen runs Samsung televisions. It's on some of their appliances.
Not on smart things.
Yeah. My bad. Yeah.
Anyway.
So, but Google also had a very brief appearance by one of the Fitbit co-founders announcing that, hey, we've had 130 million Fitbit devices sold since we started. Okay, that's great. Stacy probably has half of those herself.
It's like, I've bought 7 of them.
Yes, one for every day of the week. And they're going to integrate a lot of the health tracking features into Wear, which no surprise since Google has purchased Fitbit within the past 6 months. So not a lot of detail here. Fitbit will actually be using the new Wear platform for its devices, which I know you're not happy about that. Partly I'm thinking because Fitbit is not as, it's a little more limited than say a full featured smartwatch, but it does what you need it to do. But I know there are people who want a good smartwatch with good features, good health features. So there may be multiple options here. I wouldn't count out the basic Fitbit devices. I'm hoping not.
Yeah, well, I'm also disappointed because, Wear OS is just such a laggy, I mean, it's ancient. It doesn't get updated.
Part of it is the software. A bigger part of it, in my opinion, is the fact that they have not had good hardware support. They've been using basically the same Qualcomm Snapdragon Wear 3100 chips for 2 or 3 years. They've brought out a 4100 chip, which doubles the amount of RAM, but nobody seems to be using it. So it's like too little too late. So it's equally been hardware as far as the problems go.
Yay. Okay, so I won't be sad just yet. I will wait and see. Also, in the, I don't know, Google car
the Googleverse.
The Googleverse. Google Android is getting car key functions. So Apple has the car key platform that uses NFC and its ultra wideband chips to unlock your car door when you're nearby using your smartphone. And yeah, that's coming possibly to Google.
Well,
Android.
not possibly. It'll be later this year. It's already been announced for new BMW models, which was the first car maker to support Apple's car key as well. And it will eventually filter down, I would presume. No discussion or details on what chip they're using from a ultra wideband bit. And
here's the deal. Apple has their proprietary UW1. Is it UW1? I think so.
I think it's just U1.
U1. Sorry. I'm just adding things in here. So the U1 chip, obviously BMW does not want to make, 2 different cars for people with 2 different smartphone platforms. So,
or put 2 different UWB chips in the same car. So to cover both. Yeah.
So I'm very curious what radios they're using and how interoperable. I mean, yeah, this gets to my whole complaint about Apple and its stupid proprietary radio chips. Grr. Okay, I'm done.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
They used to have Ant. Do you remember Ant? That was pre-Bluetooth. And instead of Bluetooth, your Apple phone had Ant and you had to have devices that spoke to. Anyway, okay, I'm over it. Let's talk about data. Let's talk about this Consumer Reports report. And this was really fascinating. And I'm glad you found this, Kevin, because it's basically saying that they looked at, what they did is they looked at the connections that your smart devices make when you ask it to do things. So what services are they reaching out to call? And you want to talk about what they found?
Yeah, they tested this with, I should say Imperial College London and Northeastern University tested this. Consumer Reports reported on it, which is how we found out about it. They tested 31 different smart home devices and just did some basic commands like, what is the capital of Italy? And they said by looking at the connections that were going out to the internet and coming back, a Google Home smart speaker had sent data to 5 different destinations, and Echo Dot contacted 7 different places or locations. The worst was actually Amazon's Fire TV Stick contacting 11 different servers out there. So what's interesting is these guys blocked all of the extra connections just to leave just one open, and they were still able to get the proper answer. So now they're wondering what is happening with all these extra connections, and they can't tell because they're encrypted. So it's not very transparent what's going on there. But basically they're saying your smart devices are sending out more data than you realize and more than they probably need to.
Yes. And you can find this out. Actually, we've talked about it. There's an IoT Inspector is a service that you can use. You shouldn't run it all the time because it's using deep packet inspection. It will slow your connection down, but it actually does something very similar to this. So you can run your stuff and be like, hey, you can't block your ports, but you can see the server connections that are being made by your devices.
Yeah, after reading this, it brought me back to my Firewalla review, because that device shows you all where all your network traffic is going to out in the ether, and from what device on your network it's actually the requests are coming from. And I looked at things like what server, what country, and so on. I never looked at how many connections one request would make. But you could do it with a Firewalla.
And if you want to check this out, they actually released something called IoT Trimmer, and this will actually start blocking unnecessary connections, which is kind of cool. I have not tried it yet, but it might be something that y'all would want to do. So, Okay. Also from Consumer Reports, they noticed that 4 new video doorbells and home security cameras are vulnerable to hacking. They evaluated 13 different devices, and they found, and this isn't really a huge surprise, that video doorbells and home security cameras that maybe are less well known. So the Bosma Sentry video doorbell, the Bosma X1 security camera, the Eufy video doorbell, and the Nui Cam doorbell all had vulnerabilities. Those were fixed, and now they don't have them.
Yeah, and that kind of ties in. I know there was a quote unquote bug with a server-side update that some Eufy doorbell or camera owners were able to see random other cameras, the feeds from those about a week ago. And that should really never happen. I do think it was a bug. A lot of people were debating, is it a bug or a vulnerability? Well, I think it was a bug that introduced a self-inflicted vulnerability and was later fixed. But semantics aside, that really should never happen.
They did this server update, and what happened is, quote, a limited number of users were able to access the video feeds from other people's cameras, which is kind of a problem. They did also say that the cameras set up using Apple's HomeKit were reportedly unaffected. Now, that is all based on anecdotal evidence, not Eufy. So,
right. Well, that's likely, or at least partially, because of the HomeKit Secure Video that was introduced last year, which the Logitech Circle View that I tested, the doorbell and the Logitech Circle View camera, both support. That doesn't mean they're infallible. I mean, if Apple introduces a bug on the server side, like Eufy did, something similar could happen, but I feel a little bit better about having HomeKit secure video.
Yes. Okay. So that was, well, that's all the security stuff that's happened.
Good.
Good. Well, that's not true. That's not all. That's the stuff we know
kind of have
about.
an update to a previous cyber attack.
Yeah. So last week we talked about the Colonial pipeline attack, and it turns out that Colonial did pay their ransom. It also turns out that Colonial actually shut down the pipeline. We were like, oh, it's because they don't know what they don't know, so they have to secure everything because this is a volatile substance. They actually shut down the pipeline because they couldn't bill their customers.
How magnanimous of them.
Which I get. I mean, this is a really tough spot to be in, but it's also a crucial resource. So I'm like, oh man, what do you do here? I'm not saying that, but yes, that was, especially when shutting something down means that, you're going to have to spend a couple days to get it back up again.
Right.
But in the wake of that particular attack, it sounds like they paid a $5 million ransom. And the CEO of Swiss Re, which is an insurance firm, and it's actually a reinsurance firm, so they insure insurers. Basically, he said, yeah, this is not surprising. These hacks are no longer surprising to us. They have become a systemic problem. And then he said that the private insurance market is just not large enough to cover full-scale cyber protection to vulnerable organizations, which is basically akin to saying, hey, you know what? With climate change, if you live right next to the ocean, we're no longer going to insure your house because it floods too often, right? Mm-hmm. They're basically saying that cyber attacks are too much. The systemic risk is too high. So insuring against cyber attacks is going to become more difficult, possibly impossible.
They're saying that the problem is so big, and it is a big problem. But I also think part of it is you can't estimate if you're going to get hit with a cyber attack, and you can't estimate what the ransom may be. It's not like cybersecurity ransomware is an industry or a regulated industry where you have data. It's just not easy to figure out how much you would insure somebody for.
He says, quote, and I would actually argue that overall the problem is so big, it's not insurable. It's just too big. Because there are events that can happen at the same time everywhere that are much more worrying than what you just saw. Yeah, so that means A, we've got to figure out security. B, we've got to start applying it widely. So everybody has to get better. And I don't think there's enough, CISOs in the world for this.
Yeah, it's just, I can see the problem that they're backed into a corner with here.
Yeah. Ironically, they do still provide insurance for ships that go into Somali pirate infested waters, and they will pay ransoms there. So that's just a smaller problem, I guess.
I guess so. I guess they figure they know the odds based on how many ships are out there and how many get attacked on average per week, month, year, etc. But with cyber attacks, how do you predict that?
You don't. Or you just predict it's going to happen, it's going to cost a lot, and that's all you know. Okay, really quick, before we go to the voicemail, I'm just going to throw this out here for anybody who cares, because apparently somebody loves them. The Amazon Echo frames, the sunglasses that let you speak to Madam A, now come in 2 new variations, a blue blocker and a blue light blocker and a sunglasses. So if you're into the Echo frames, which Kevin is most decidedly not, this is available to you.
Yeah, and I think they're $269.
Yes, that is the price.
Yep. No thanks.
Kevin didn't like the Echo frames. Why didn't you like them again?
Well, I think part of it is that it's just adding a device that I already have a device that can do all that. And it's not really adding much value to me personally. Were I embedded in the Amazon ecosystem? Maybe, but no, I get more valuable information from other ecosystems.
Got it. This is not the entry point into the Madam A Echo device ecosystem. Okay. Now it is time for the Internet of Things podcast Hotline, which this week is sponsored by Iot. Ayla offers a modern platform and solutions that allow manufacturers and service providers to develop connected products to accelerate their digital transformation initiatives. Ayla now has something called Fast Track. It is a innovative and turnkey IoT business model designed with a focus on simplicity for the fastest time to market at the lowest project risk. If you actually want to know more about Fast Track, go to aylanetworks.com. Alrighty, the Iot Podcast Hotline. We do this every week, and if you would like to have your questions answered, you just need to give us a call at 512-623-7424. And as a bonus, you are entered to win the smart speaker of your choice. And this week's question, once again, is all about Matter. Let's hear it.
My name is Josh Pollard. Hi, Stacey and Kevin. I'm moving at the end of the month, and I've already boxed up my Insteon lighting products, a smattering of Z-Wave items, and my SmartThings hub. With the new house comes new smart home opportunities, right as Project Chip, or as today it was announced it's now being called Matter, is all the rage. So, should I continue with my hodgepodge setup of all of these different standards, or sell all of this gear and look forward to using Matter for lighting, locks, thermostats, sensors, and more? Thanks.
Okay, Josh, I feel you. You're ready for the next generation. You're moving houses. This is the best time, except it's not.
And it's the worst time because it's early.
It's too early to dump your stuff. We don't have Matter certified sensors yet. We don't have, yes, we do. Well, actually, no, we don't, because they're just starting testing and we won't actually have Matter certified products until the fall at the earliest. And most companies are going to start issuing new products that are Matter compliant next year. So what I would say to you is don't dump the gear if it makes you happy, or you can go smart homeless for the next 8 months or so, I guess, if you want.
We don't know how long.
Yeah, we really don't. So I would say put up your gear that makes you happy. And we also reached out to SmartThings, since you have the SmartThings hub that probably ties some of your other stuff together. And it looks like SmartThings is going to support Matter. Samantha Osborne, who is their head of marketing there, she tells us that, SmartThings intends to support Matter while maintaining support for Zigbee and Z-Wave protocols. So everybody out there who's got a SmartThings hub, rest easy. They're going to do both. And this will be great. And so I would recommend to you, do not dump your SmartThings hub. You want to keep your Insteon gear, keep it. You're going to be able to bridge those protocols for quite some time.
Yeah, I just made a transition, or I'm still in the midst of it, I guess, between Google and Apple. And I've looked at it as a transition. I didn't just rip out all the Google stuff, for example. And I would say this to anybody who's thinking about their current gear versus what's coming down the pike with Matter and Thread and so on. Make it a transition. Most of the industry players here have, I think, committed to a transition as opposed to, hey, we're not going to support the old stuff after this date because we're going to be all Matter. That doesn't seem to be the case. So unless you, as you said, Stacey, can live without your smart home gear for an indeterminate amount of time, why not keep it and just replace on an ad hoc basis as more products become available?
The other option actually is you could move next year.
But it's almost too early to say because we don't know. What if there are particular devices that you have today that there are no Matter compliant light bulbs out next year or until, maybe it's a bad example, but you don't know that you'll be able to replace everything is my point.
That is true. And I was just kidding. I don't think he should hold off his move since he is mostly packed. It sounds like, go Josh. All right. Thank you for that, Josh. Hopefully that answers your question. I'm sorry you're going to have to put up your old smart home gear in your new home only to transition gradually over time to Matter. And remember, if you would like to be part of the show and give us a call on the hotline, all you have to do is call us at 512-623-7424 and leave your question. And that concludes this portion of the show. Please stay tuned for Mark Hanson, who is the VP of Innovation at Sony Semiconductor Americas. We're going to be talking about computer vision, especially in industrial and enterprise type settings. And he even is promising us, are y'all ready for this? Machine learning on the edge, like actual training, not just inference. I don't know. Stay tuned. And now it's time for a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Very. Hey everyone, we are taking a quick break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Very, a leading IoT engineering firm. And fans of this podcast might be interested to know that Very has launched a podcast of its own about the IoT space called the Over the Air Podcast. And I have Ryan Prosser, the CEO of Very. Ryan, I'd love for you to share a little bit about the podcast with our listeners today.
Thanks, Stacey. Yeah, sure thing. The podcast is called Over the Air, IoT Connected Devices in the Journey. And so far, we've had a lot of big guests on, including the former CEO of Boeing, who's gone on to raise a bunch of money for IoT initiatives in space. I also recently interviewed the CEO of Monarch Motors, who've developed essentially Tesla for tractors.
All right. So tell us, why did you start this podcast?
Rather than outcomes, we really wanted to dive into the journey and share those experiences with the audience, aka what went right, what went wrong, and how our listeners can bake those lessons into their own IoT initiatives. You're going to hear business leaders sharing, kind of warts and all lessons they've learned. And that hopefully gets them thinking, oh my God, I would have made that mistake.
I love it. I love that kind of show. So what can you tell us about the types of things you'll be focused on?
One thing that I personally am really passionate about is unpacking and exploring the missteps and some of the scar tissue related to those lessons learned, especially mistakes that didn't appear to be mistakes at the outset. Why was that not the correct path? What would you have done differently? Things like that. What we see a lot at Very, and we see hundreds of these major engagements a year, is that there aren't nearly as many unique problems as you'd expect. There are a lot of common mistakes that are avoidable. They're incredibly difficult, but rarely unique. And if you see enough repetitions, patterns start to emerge. And our goal for the audience is for them to get those repetitions or some of those repetitions vicariously through these interviews. We really love it when clients ask us, I wonder how company X solved this problem, because it looks and feels a lot like what we're dealing with. Since we have those repetitions, we often know the answer.
So if anyone listening to this has their own amazing story to tell, or knows someone who does, or they wish that you would cover a certain topic, what is the best way for them to reach out to your team to suggest guests or topics for the show in the future?
Definitely email us, podcast@verypossible.com. You can also DM me on LinkedIn. My handle is rprosser26.
And where can listeners go to find the podcast?
So like you said, the podcast is called Over the Air, IoT Connected Devices and the Journey. And you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Mark Hanson, who is the VP of Business and Technology Innovation at Sony Semiconductor Americas. Hello, Mark. How are you today?
Great, Stacey. How are you doing?
I am doing super well. And I am excited to talk to you because we are going to be talking about computer vision and how, y'all are making that possible and the cool stuff you can do when we have it. So let's start this off by talking about what we're going to talk about when we talk about computer vision. First off, Sony makes imaging sensors. Explain what image sensors are in relation to cameras.
Yeah, we make lots of different image sensors, and image sensors are utilized in all kinds of different cameras, including smartphones and digital SLRs. Virtually any camera that exists today that's digital is using a image sensor of some sort. And the way image sensors work is they basically capture light, convert it to electricity, and then interpret those light images and electrons into a digital form, and then output them into photographs or pictures or whatever you want to use them for these days.
Now, we talk all the time on the show about cameras, people recognition, object recognition, and what all this can enable. So I'd love for you to talk about your latest generation of image sensors and how y'all are kind of building that for the Internet of Things.
We have historically been known as making some of the best image sensors in the world for doing things like beautiful videos or photographs. But as you're aware, running an IoT podcast, many of the things cameras are being utilized today have nothing to do with taking beautiful photos. There are lots of examples, automated cars, robot machinery. So one of the things we got to thinking about is, what if we could enable sensors to do some of those things directly on the cameras or the image sensor themselves, as opposed to having to go plug the camera into a computer and doing this kind of quote-unquote computer vision. So one of the ideas that we came up with is the ability to put a small DSP on the backside of an image sensor, which essentially enables us to use tiny machine learning in the back of the sensor, where we can actually put object detect libraries. We can actually program different types of object detect libraries in the backside of these sensors. I'll give you an example. We are working on a project called lip reading. You may have heard it at CES last year. We announced we're working with the Sony Vision S team to incorporate lip reading technology in our Vision S prototype vehicle. What lip reading actually does is it interprets and predicts speech just based on looking at your lips. However, the process to get to that point requires quite a bit of horsepower just to find the person's face, to find where their lips are, and send the model only the region of interest, in other words, the lips, that we need in order to process that. So we're not currently doing this today, but we could in the future use our new IMX500 with this DSP on the back of it to offload some of that processing directly on the image sensor. So we just have to worry with the actual identification of the lips, not all the other stuff to do. But that's one example. There's lots of examples where we could maybe do things like stockout detection in retail, or we could do things like recognizing whether a robot is in a location where a human is and instantly shut it off. The nice thing about doing this on the backside of an image sensor is it's really fast because it doesn't have to go to a separate SoC and through a bus, through a MIPI port, or through a USB port or Ethernet port. It's done all on the backside of the chip, so it's really, really quick. The other thing is we may be able to reduce the overall cost of implementing these kind of machine vision-enabled solutions in the long run.
We're huge fans of all of those things here on the show. Reducing latency, reducing power consumption, and actually reducing components is always a useful thing right now because, hey, chip shortage. So let's talk about where this is being used today. So I know lip reading is not there yet, and we'll get into the details of that in a bit. But where are people actually using image sensors today?
Yeah, machine learning enabled image sensors are relatively new. Actually, we were the world's first. So there aren't a lot of examples where people are doing these kind of implementations today because it was just released. However, the interesting thing is we're already starting to work with ISVs and developers to implement some of this tiny ML to do things like facilities management. Of course, with the current situation with COVID, there's a need to try to understand who's in the building, how many people are there, energy, power management, all of those types of things are elements that are needed. And these cameras could be, or these image sensors could be placed in little cameras, even battery-run little cameras that can run for maybe upwards of a year, depending on what you're doing to it, where these could be mounted all over an office and enable people to understand how many people are in a given area of the office. And basically what's happening is the image sensors themselves are determining who's in the office and then doing a count and then sending that count as the data that comes out of that particular camera, not necessarily any images or videos as an example.
That's great for privacy.
Yeah, it's perfect for privacy in the standpoint that traditionally when you see a camera, you think, oh, they're sending an image somewhere. So there are a lot of areas where you still want the capability to do some of these object detects or people counting or heat maps or stockout detection in retail environments, or you want to understand whether or not an end cap gets attention or not. And those kind of things could be done by these types of teeny little ML-enabled image sensors in a very, very small camera. You can imagine these cameras being relatively small because the image sensor itself is relatively tiny.
Okay. How static is the model on this camera? Are they designed to be measuring the same thing all the time, or is that something that might be updated with a new model if I wanted to move from tracking people to tracking the number of animals?
Yeah, the current IMX500 actually has the ability to dynamically upload models. So you could run in one instance, like we have some retail customers that are thinking about doing stockout detection cameras that run on batteries. However, they also may want to understand things like how many people come down this particular aisle. So what we can do is actually dynamically upload and download a new model to run on it and do that periodically. So let's say 4 times a day you want to do stockout detection, and in between you want to run once an hour, you want to understand how many people are in the aisleways. You could run a model that would go off and run that and then flip back to the stockout detection model 2 hours later as an example.
Oh, that's actually way more flexible than I was thinking. So I could detect one thing at one point in time and then update it as often as I want?
You could. And the other nice thing about the way we've kind of set up the Sony application that works with the ISVs is that you could actually even do training on those devices themselves. So if you did need to capture new data, let's say a new product came into play, and you wanted to be able to recognize a new box of Wheaties or whatever, it would enable you to have the stocker throw the Wheaties out there, and then you could capture the data if you wanted to retrain the model to now understand something new. So that's a very simple example of how you could do that.
But training at the edge is actually a pretty phenomenal thing. I mean, this is not something that's offered today. It's usually just inference. So in this example, I would be showing the camera my new images that I want it to look for, and it's capable of recognizing those things going forward?
So what you would do is capture a number of those images at different angles and in the store environment as an example, and then you would build a new model and then put the new model on that the same device. And then the nice thing about that is, let's say as an example, a store environment, they may have dynamic lighting changes based on the day or night. We also happen to have a small ISP on the image sensor that could do a little signal processing and adjust for brightness and do other things. But it can also accommodate in the training capability those types of changes that could occur. So it's actually a little bit better accuracy from the standpoint that it knows exactly where it's going to look at and determine how it moves forward.
That is super flexible. I like it. All right, let's transition a little bit from like a retail or a factory environment. Although one of my favorite factory environment uses of computer vision is actually flare detection in oil and gas refineries, because it's like super dangerous and it's really easy to have a camera monitor this as opposed to people. So, yay, there's a lot of cool use cases for computer vision. So in the consumer environment, let's talk about what we might do with these tiny little cameras with edge-based processing that can, I'm thinking, if it recognizes people, it could tell me who's at my door.
Currently, we are focused on doing more of the industrial retail area, partially because, as you know, there's a lot of ISV and development work that needs to go into creating these tiny ML models, because there are no other devices out there that can do this kind of thing at the level or integration that we're doing today. So we're trying to focus the engineering resources and developer resources towards those particular areas. But hypothetically, anything that is currently being done in the industrial or commercial side could obviously be applicable to any kind of model enablement in a consumer device. It could be a person detection. It could be put on. I heard somebody talking the other day about a device that enables to recognize your pet, so it can let you in the pet door. The pet gets its own sort of personal ID entrance, as an example. So we could do those kind of things eventually, but initially we're going to focus our areas more on solving what I would call more commercial or industrial related activities.
Okay, so then where does something like lip reading fit into this? Because, and to be clear, I want to be really clear here. This particular image processor and the model on that would be looking for, hey, this person's lips are moving, but you would need an additional layer and probably something that can run a larger model for actually reading the lips, right?
That is correct. So as I said, the implementation that we might use on something like lip reading would be just to do the initial hardware to get the relevant data into the model that we would need, which is the lips. The good thing about that is it could increase the overall performance. But you're right, it does require the ability to use an external SoC or a processor to do a larger vocabulary. Today, Sony has enabled some examples of this in our announcement at CES with the Sony Vision S team. And we've implemented some initial phrase capability that can basically work in any noise dynamic environment. So, Stacey, I'm lucky enough I own 2 convertibles. And the unfortunate part is I can't use speech recognition of any kind. It doesn't matter whose it is. It just doesn't work. With the top down or the windows open, it essentially creates so much white noise that there is no way to get a good audio signal from microphones that are placed in the car. So one of the challenges I gave the engineering team was to think about the types of computer vision enabled things that can solve problems similar to that. How can we make it so that regardless of the speech dynamics, you can recognize speech at extreme high accuracy? We're talking almost nearly perfect because there is no noise dynamics to distort what that potential person is saying. By the way, there's one other very interesting point about lip reading. You know, we're in these environments today with COVID where you don't necessarily want to touch anything today. So one of the things that we started thinking about was, what if we could do something like ATM or kiosks where you don't touch and you don't even have to speak? You just merely mouth the words and it recognizes what you're saying. We kind of call it secret mode in lip reading technology. But it's the idea of just mouthing the words. And, you know, if you're sitting at an ATM and you want to make a large withdrawal, but you don't want to let anybody know about it, you just mouth the amount that you want, shoots out the dollars, and you're ready to go.
Nice. All right. And kind of crazy. My aunt is a lip reader, and yeah, you've got to be careful around her. So let me ask you, because there is a, I don't want to say a conflict. It's not a conflict, but there is definitely room for debate over when an image sensor or a camera might make more sense than like an occupancy sensor, or maybe like something like LiDAR or some sort of RF interference, you know, to detect something. If I'm a designer trying to figure out, like, if I just want to count people, is an image sensor really the best way to go? How do you make those decisions as a designer trying to figure out which type of technology to use?
Yeah, I think there's many, many factors associated with trying to design a solution, quote unquote. There are single-purpose devices that designers could go off and use, like an example, infrared-based people counter or heat map. But those are single-purpose type devices. And one of the things that we're trying to do through our new technology enablement is really give a lot of flexibility that you talked about earlier, the ability to have different dynamic models running. You know, the example I gave you earlier in the retail environment, you know, there may be some other thing that the retailers may want to understand when somebody picks up a particular item and they also pick up a second item. Those types of inferences or changes we could do easily in those types of programmable devices as opposed to those that are single purpose where you're only getting one data point. The other thing is we may want to fuse together numerous different types of data points. Could be the heat map, could be people counting, could be the height of individuals based on how they want to do the shelves. It could be where people tend to gravitate in terms of their eye position, as an example. And combining those things together, we might be able to do some data analytics that maybe do things like improve retail sales. Those types of things are the things that I think our customers are looking for, as opposed to just putting a bunch of single-purpose devices together and plugging them in.
I like that. All right. Is there anything else you want to add?
Yeah, the only other thing that I would like to say with regards to new technologies like lip reading, one of the things that we want to try to do is talk to a lot of folks in the industry, whether it's the auto industry, the banking industry, whether it's the folks in the industrial industry. A lot of folks are now starting to think about cobots, humans and robots working together. So one of the things we really want to do is we want input from potential customers and partners who are looking at those areas and want to consider things like lip reading or our IMX500 enabled DSP image sensor chip. Those are ideal for us. So we'd love to hear from your audience who'd have interest in those areas and want to explore, particularly in the automotive side. Automotive OEMs and first-tier guys would really love to talk to those folks, learn more about what their needs are.
That's interesting because with cobots, I know there's been a lot of focus on things like radar technology because, again, it's lower latency and it's a little more fine-tuned than image recognition. So you're kind of addressing a little bit of the latency issues by running the models on the image sensor. I don't know about accuracy.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're trying to do is think about things like where you would mount potentially those on a given robot, as an example. So you might have a tiny camera on the edge of the robot that can merely just detect when it sees a person coming into a particular area. And because of the reduction in latency and the size, frankly, the robotics guys are very interested in considering those types of implementations.
All right. Well, Mark, thanks for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it.
It was great, Stacy. Look forward to talking to you further.
That's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, if you'd like more IoT news, sign up for my newsletter at stacyoniot.com. We'll see you next week.